from my work with Ann Barlin, I learned a lot about teaching. She had Dance Center in Los Angeles. This was when I was 19 or 18 years old. That's what year? 35, 45, 50, 54 and 55, 1954 and 55. She had a center in Los Angeles, and we taught in 8 extensions across the city. And her idea was, when you went to the African American community in Watson Compton, you learned their ethnic dances and you taught them from there. When we went to the Japanese community, we all went down to the Japanese part of Los Angeles and performed in the Bonadori Festival with them every summer and put our obis and kimonos on. When we taught in the Jewish area, which was more like in the valley, we would study Yiddish dance from Eastern Europe. When we did the Latino section of LA, which was in the more downtown in the east side, we studied flamenco and el jarabe tapatio and la jota, so we understood ethnic dance forms. And then once a month, all 9 communities would come together, and we would do a creative movement group together, and we would share dances together, and we would teach folk dances to everyone who was there. And we had Odetta come and visit us, and we had Pete Seeger. It was nice. And that taught me a lot about dance. It said every culture is not a melting pot that should be blurred in the country. Every culture is absolutely unique. And my commitment was to tap into their roots. And so after Dance Center, when I began to create my own company with Kate Hughes and studied with Bella Lewitsky, I applied that to my growing sense that the community is part of the choreography, and that maybe our dance forms are a little artificial because we're always performing and then they're the audience. And then I started to study how ritual occurred in less complex cultures than ours, where prayer for rain was a dance, where preparing to meet the hunt was a dance, where healing a wounded person was a dance. So then I started to teach at a Jewish Reform synagogue. I taught a course for 5 years called Faith Through Expressive Movement. And I got the boys, to dance. Their parents would come to school and say, "What is going on? My son wants to come to religious school." And then I would have them take off their shoes. And no one had heard of that, of little boys 9, 10, and 11 taking off their shoes. They were so excited to come to class. And I taught them, for instance, the Joseph and his brothers, that Joseph's brothers were very cruel and jealous, and they sold him into slavery. And I did a whole exercise with the dance, because once they were in slavery, and the legend says that the Jews were in poverty during the drought and came down to Egypt, and there Jacob was now the Pharaoh's prime minister, who determined who got wheat and who got food. And Joseph's brothers had to look him in the eye. So I developed a whole concept about what it's like when you're ashamed and you have a secret. What is it like when someone says, "Look at me," and you want to avert your eyes and you want to hide? So it was a dialogue between 2 people that involved confrontation and facing what was going on. They loved it. The kids loved it. They loved pouncing on Joseph. They loved all things that boys were not taught in religious school, that their lives were very complex and very rich and filled with all kinds of emotion. And I did that for 4 or 5 years, and I'd already been choreographing. I started with Kate Hughes, and we choreographed a whole concert called Buck Light and Tumbling Spring, a nature concert in 4 art forms. We choreographed a work about the gesture of deer. We choreographed a work called Ocean, which was all about the swirling of waves. And then we choreographed one called Eucalyptus, which was about the life and death of a eucalyptus tree. So that was very exciting. And I choreographed a solo called New Birth and a dance called Earth, about the earth and the cracks from fissures and earthquakes and the layers of life in the earth, and then the birth of a bird, and then finally a leaf fallen leaf. Those were 3 major parts of a kind of a dance symphony. The process of a class is based on many years of a master study in Laban movements analysis, which is a profound and very down-to-earth study of human movement and its meaning, how every movement is meaningful. And the meaning makes you very conscious of how a movement starts, where the intention is. And so that part, where is the intention coming from? How do you tune into it? How do you listen to the intention and the action that comes from the intention? How do you get there? I consider my sessions a dance class, but I consider my sessions the kind of dance class that Michael Jackson spoke about. I think there's a quote from him. There's also one from Kurt Sachs. It says something about, or T.S. Eliot, I forget what it is, but it's something like, I become the dance and the dance takes me over, and the dance and I are not any more separate, and then I am the dance. One of the things that I do teach is choreography. And maybe what I teach as choreography is a blend between the structured and the formal and the creative. How do you create a motif? How do you create a theme? Do you say this movement plus this movement means this movement or something, which is a kind of a design form. Everything's symmetrical. And now break it and it's asymmetrical. So that's a form. Or take a movement and it's a flowing, watery movement, and now make it a strong, resisted movement. And now make it a light and quick movement, but it's the same movement. So those are things you learn in choreography. You learn them because in dance, it's a visual art form. And although it's a rhythmic art form, it's a musical sound goes with it, it's a visual art form. And its rules are both movement rules, like centrifugal force. You see it in a choreography, you know that's going. You can feel it, that it's centrifugal, and then you'll suddenly break it up and shoot everyone up into the air. And you can know that's a force of nature. And so I use forces of nature and design, but they all come from motifs that are coming from within. The choreography of each work is totally different from each other work. The language is totally different. The movement is totally different, because each choreography comes from its own essential identity. There's a conceptual thing about the way I work, and particularly how I work with the art form and the community. Now, there's a different technique in working with choreographing for a company and an audience of 400 people and having it be a dance. And that's what I did with Talit, the prayer shawl, with this 40-foot by 35-foot fabric that 5 dancers' heads are in, and the dancers themselves create this mesmerizing shapes and forms of the beauty of the dance. And at the end, the audience is invited to come in and become the fringes of this prayer shawl. And the whole audience encircles this shawl. And then they become the earth with the shawl, and the air and the water and the fire. And they move with the thought. And they go inside and step in through the holes and get born through it. And then they all pray into the cloth and fold it. The older people fold the first layer, the second layer, and the third layer. And when it's done, it's very long and it's rolled and becomes a Torah scroll out of 45 feet of dance. They take these poles and they lift it over our heads, 10 feet over our heads, and the whole audience comes in and does this beautiful circle dance underneath it. And I never taught the dance, but I taught the 8 dancers how to, just with their bodies, lead people into these primal circles, going into the center, meeting another person, making a chain line and holding hands. These are basic communal forms. So the dance is highly artistic and performance-based, and it's highly communal, and it's ritual. Oh, yeah, this is a hot one. There's a piece called Purses, Pockets, and Family Secrets. And I recorded people from every culture, Catholics, Jews, African Americans, people in Al-Anon, people, psychologists. I recorded their secrets. And I did, amongst other things, I told the story of my secrets through dance and narrative. The narrative was recorded. The birth, how I was born, my mother was hysterical. It was a kind of a hospital-type birth. And I related that to the way people are disconnected from their mother, their birth culture, their home. And then the next wound was loss of my father, which was a heart tear. And I related that to how cultures lose the power of the male as a positive force. And it was all acted and danced by me. The third one was torn between loyalties, being pulled. And I had a shaman in the dance who every section she would mark my body where that wound was. So she had a knife, with blood knife, and she would, at the end of the father section, she would mark my heart. And then sexual abuse, and at that one, she marks my lower pelvis. And attempted suicide, she marks my hands bleeding. And after that, I wrap myself in all of these cloths, and I'm locked up in the cloths, totally paralyzed, and I say, someone's got to hear this secrets. Someone's got to hear this. I can't hold it in anymore, or I will destroy myself. And someone steps out from the audience and says, I can do that. I can hear them. And then people start coming up and making a circle. And they begin to unwind me. Each wound, someone else in the audience picks the fabric and unwinds that part. And then another wound that was wrapped, someone else, until the audience has unwound me and has these bloody cloths in their hands. And then I ask them to sit down in small circles and bring bowls of water. And for 45 minutes, they tell each other's secrets and they wash each other's hands. And they use the water. And then they come back when they have shared. And in the circle, we tie all the cloths together. We knot them together and we lean back off of them, supported by the secret sharing. And then we gather them up and gather them into the center and bury them in the earth. So what's the technique for this dance? I have a piece called Sarah's Speak, which is a solo dance with Bonya improvising on the guitar, and I speak and I dance. And it's a dance drama that's based on my awareness that in the Bible there's this story about Abraham taking his son Isaac up to sacrifice him because God told him to do this. And I'm saying, what a crazy thing! And I'm saying, where was Sarah, his wife? Why isn't she even in the story? So I decided to be Sarah, and I rewrote the story. I did this dance in which I speak, and it begins with me looking for Isaac. I come in with a candle in the room and I look, have you seen Isaac? Have you seen my son? And I'm like a wild woman. And finally I meditate and I work and I realize that I am the mother of visionaries. I'm the mother of mothers and the mother of fathers. I'm the mother of a lineage. And suddenly it comes to me, Abraham went to sacrifice my son. And he didn't ask me. God, you get it? You told Abraham to sacrifice my son, but you didn't ask me, his mother. And then she has this vision, which she dances out, where she gets all her fury out, and then she decides she climbs up to the mountain where the sacrifice is being done, and she wrestles with Abraham and pulls the knife out of his hand. And the chant begins, do not touch him. Do not touch him, which Bonya chants with the audience. And then I put this gorgeous drum on my belly, and I do this gorgeous dance in English and Hebrew. Hamalach shel Elohim hi isha, the angel of God is a woman, nurturing. And then he chants, Hamalach shel Elohim hi isha, and the audience, do not touch him. And so that's one kind of dance. It came because of a justice. This was a dance about justice. This was a dance that combined my identity as a Jew with my commitment to the truth and to transformation. So I took a story and changed it. But each choreography is a new language. Like You Were in All That Breathes. That was a flamenco language primarily. And it was a flamenco language because I was dealing with the kind of dance that the Jews, Muslims, and Christians did in Spain in the 10th century. So I used flamenco as the blender, the 11th century. But the flamenco was for the purpose of creating a common, you might call it a common style. So the dance had a line you could see because it was all one style. So I create a style for each dance. It's not just free improvisation. It's got a style. Vibrant Soul, the dance that was based on Yiddish folk movements, and the arguments at the wedding, and the responses of the people. I never left the essential motif of Yiddish folk dance, even though the dancers took it to places that were exalted and expanded and so on. And then there was little dramas inside. So I contained everything in that style. In the schools, when I do Flight, Fight, Freeze, which I did in the inner city for 5 years, these are 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds and 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds. And I'm not African American, and they're all African American. And I invited my community, my 6 dancers who worked with me in order to teach them. I taught them the principles of Flight, Fight, Freeze, and they helped me lead these improvisational structures. So they were dancers, but like Renee and Michelle and Holly and Colleen, these are people who already were dancers, but they had to go through, like, they'd have to go through the fiery hoop in order to be a part of Flight, Fight, Freeze. They couldn't just do it as another movement. It was too raw. And so I built the technique that we taught the kids together with the dancers, knowing that the kids need more guidance. They need to have structures. So we'd lead a warm-up. We'd put some great rhythmic music on. And whatever the theme for the day, like this today, the theme was fight. How do we fight? Why do we fight? When do we fight? When do we try not to fight? And so all of the moves would be, okay, we do something really simple with them, walking thing, and then if Jerry was leading it, she'd say, oh, now, fist your hand, let it go, fist your hand, let it go, fist your hand, let it go. So she's introducing the themes through their body. And then later on, we imagine that one of us is a cheetah and the other one is a impala, and the cheetah's chasing the impala, and how does the chase go? How assertive does the predator get? How fast does the impala have to move? What happens if the cheetah gets on him? How do they freeze? How do you give up and freeze, which is what you do when you can't run or fight? Primordial round, that was about my death and the person I am mentoring and them receiving the message. And that piece was, and still is, it's a piece about the journey from the wise mother giving birth, watching the child move out into full independence, and then the child watches me age and has to negotiate how to interact with me as I move towards death and she moves towards life.